The 80s ThunderCats was a great show, nobody denies that, but it did have nearly 130 episodes. Now, I don't know about you, but a fellow nerd and I got to talking about ThunderCats recently. Nostalgia hit us and we were like craving to do a ThunderCats marathon. But then, we are not kids anymore and life demands us to work. That's when I decided I would jot down the 10 best episodes from the show and create a video around them. I mean, I thought several others might be facing the same issue, right? ThunderCats wasn't just another cartoon, it was a story about survival, honor, and unlikely heroes who had fled their dying home planet of Thundera to carve out a new life on Third Earth. And man, were there some really adult themes in this kids show. But more importantly, it was about action, swords, strange worlds, and moral lessons that made it such a unique experience back then. And that's why even today, people like you and I revisit its episodes with a smile. We're talking about episodes where Lion-O wrestles with his own identity, journeys through time to his lost home planet, faces soul-bending challenges like the Anointment Trials, and even crosses paths with hunters and ghosts of legendary warriors. So, let's dive in together and explore the 10 most rewatchable ThunderCats episodes. Episodes that still deserve your attention decades later.
What's happening?
Exodus, Season 1, Episode 1. The story begins inside the Thunderian flagship, where the ThunderCats watch their home planet, Thundera, hang on the edge of extinction. At Jaga's request, Cheetara brings young Lion-O to the control room so he can witness it himself. Now, Cheetara is a fully grown cat, or Thunderian, and Lion-O was still a cub, so when you look at this scene, their relationship, and their age gap, and then burden yourself with the knowledge that Cheetara and Lion-O would form a romantic bond of sorts, and that Lion-O would have a heartbreak, it feels a bit weird. I mean, look at the age difference. It sounds a bit like someone should be on those files. You know which files. But I digress. So those ThunderCats stand there as Thundera explodes before their eyes. Lion-O is devastated, and honestly, who would not be? Jaga, the eldest of them all, consoles him by saying that the planet may be gone, but the code of Thundera lives on in him as the future lord of the ThunderCats. Now, Jaga takes Lion-O to the sword chamber. Inside rests the Sword of Omens, which houses the Eye of Thundera, the source of the ThunderCats' power. He gathers the others and equips them with protective suits and weapons. But before the ThunderCats could appreciate their new weapons and clothing, the mutants attacked. Oh, and Jaga gave them the new clothing because they needed it now that Thundera was gone. You see, on Thundera itself, they did not need all this, but out of Thundera is a different thing altogether. It's similar to us using oxygen masks and cylinders when going underwater for long. So, as I was saying, the mutants attacked the Thunderian fleet and destroyed every ship other than the flagship. Why? Well, Jaga surmises that the mutants knew that the flagship housed the Eye of Thundera, and they did not want to risk losing it. After all, the Eye of Thundera was the thing they were after. And I'm sure you already know that the Eye was the source of the ThunderCats' powers. Next, the mutants board the vessel, and a fight breaks out across its corridors. Slythe and Jackalman push their way to the sword chamber, where Lion-O and Snarf stand guard. At first, the sight of a boy struggling with a massive sword amuses them, and to be honest, previously Lion-O could not even lift the sword. But Jaga assured him that one day the sword would fit right in his hands. Kinda like Dunk with Arlen's sword if you've watched Seven Kingdoms. Anyway, the amusement of Slythe and Jackalman vanishes when Lion-O lifts the blade and makes it roar. The mutants get super scared, retreat to their mothership, and pull back into space. Following this, Panthrope assesses the damage. The flagship cannot reach the intended galaxy. Instead, he sets a course for Third Earth, which has a breathable atmosphere. It was closer than their previous destination in cosmic terms, yet still light years away. Jaga orders the ThunderCats into suspension capsules to survive the journey, but says that he would remain outside in order to pilot the ship, as it was already damaged and he did not trust the robot pilot with such an important journey. Furthermore, Jaga tells them that although the capsules slow aging, they do not stop it entirely. The others protest, of course, but Jaga shuts them up by saying that, as the oldest among them, he would not survive the trip even inside one. They say goodbye. The ThunderCats enter their capsules while Jaga pilots the ship alone for years. Eventually, he knows he cannot continue. So, for the last leg of the journey, he switches the vessel to autopilot and breathes his last. His body fades into nothingness, leaving only his legacy, but not his carcass. Finally, the flagship reaches Third Earth and crash lands. Lion-O and Snarf's capsules eject along with the Sword of Omens. Snarf awakens first and rouses Lion-O, who emerges as a grown Thunderian, though he was still the young cub mentally. But lo and behold, the mutants strike again. They had reached Third Earth too, too, sniffing the eye of Thundera. They attack the capsules while the other Thundercats remain asleep, but Lion-O charges them, and although he was heavily outnumbered, the tides of battle shifted when Snarf tossed him the Sword of Omens. And that's when we hear those magical words for the first time. The sword answers, and the Thundercats awaken. Together they repel the mutants, who teleport back to their ship and retreat. And with that, the exile begins. Thundera is gone, Jaga is gone, but the Thundercats endure, and Lion-O promises them a new Thunderian empire on Third Earth, with their help of course. The Ghost Warrior, Season 1, Episode 11. Alright, so this episode opens in the middle of a thunderstorm, and two young Bolkans run for cover and take shelter under a tree, which, in hindsight, is not the safest plan during lightning season. And sure enough, a blazing bolt hits the tree, splits it clean down the middle, and reveals a hidden chamber underneath. Now, if you're two curious kids and a secret door opens in the ground, you're not walking away from that. Of course they go in. And as for these two Bolkans, they thought they might find treasure inside since the place had been hidden from everyone until now. Instead, they don't find treasure, they find Groon the Destroyer, or rather, they free his ghost. Groon was an ancient menace who once terrorized Third Earth, and he emerged from centuries of imprisonment after all these years. Although he was weak, he was very much free. So it turns out that when an evil spirit wakes up hungry, he looks for fuel. In Groon's case, that fuel is Thundrillium. Soon after, he notices the cat's lair and is surprised to see such a fortress on Third Earth, and begins absorbing its Thundrillium reserves. Meanwhile, inside the lair, things get weird. Lights flicker, systems act up, and the Thundercats scramble to figure out what unseen force is draining their power. Eventually, Groon materializes before them, taunts them a bit, and vanishes with a promise that he will be back. The next day, he starts wrecking settlements across Third Earth. The Bolkans, the Wolos, the Burbles, nobody is safe. Groon demands fire rocks, but the substance was so volatile that mining it had been banned centuries ago. Naturally, the people of Third Earth did not have any. When the frightened races turn to the Thundercats, Tigra connects the dots and realizes fire rocks are actually Thundranium, same dangerous material that weakened Thundercats, kinda like the kryptonite. Groon heads straight for the Thundranium pits and forges a battle club out of it, which only means that he's not here to play nice. Back at Cat's Lair, the team tries to identify him. Lion-O even uses the Sword of Omens sight beyond sight, but nothing comes up. I mean, the sword was not a psychic, but someone among them was. That is when Panthro looks at Chitara because she had psychic powers. Now, I'll tell you something funny. So when they all look at her, she's like, no, don't ask me to do it. It takes a toll. Oh, so bad. Lion-O hears it, and he's like, yeah, okay, I get it. You don't have to do the whole psychic thing. And immediately after that, Chitara is like, no, I will do it. I will look into who Groon is. I mean, girl, decide. Don't be like Rachel from Nolan's Batman trilogy. Initially, she would tell Bruce that he doesn't do anything, so she cannot be with him. The dude went on to become Batman, like he became the Batman. And then this girl is like, no, I can't be with you because you're doing so much. Like, what? Anyway, Chitara uses her sixth sense, and her vision reveals that Groon was once a Thundercat, a friend of Jaga. They fought side by side until greed changed him. Jaga had to defeat and banish him. Panthro concludes that Groon's old ship must have ended up on Third Earth, which explains how he resurfaced. And then Groon attacks the cat's lair directly, swinging that Thundranium battle club like he wants to remodel the place. Lion-O calls upon Jaga's spirit, which, let's be honest, is exactly what Groon wanted, a rematch. Oh, and Lion-O needed Jaga because only a ghost could fight a ghost. The two clash in spirit form, but Groon disarms Jaga. Lion-O reacts and throws the Sword of Omens to his mentor. However, the radiation from the Thundranium weakens Jaga. I was surprised to see that Jaga was weakened by the Thundranium, but not Groon, even though he was a Thundercat too. I guess they didn't expect kids to understand the loophole, but hey, I'm not a kid any longer. I'm just a nerd, so I'll notice all this. Anyway, Lion-O then tells Jaga to take his strength. That boost turns the tide, and Jaga overpowers Groon and banishes him once again. With the threat gone, Jaga returns Lion-O's strength and his sword, and the episode ends with the two Bolkans coming to Lion-O to apologize for freeing the Ghost Warrior.
Not this time! Sword of Omens, give me power beyond power!
Return to Thundera, Season 1, Episode 20. The episode begins inside Castle Plundar, where the mutants had prepared a presentation for their high horribleness. Slythe is practically glowing with pride as he unveils their latest toy, a Plundarian warbot, to Mumra. And to prove it works, he orders it to zap a nearby frog dog. The poor creature turns into a statue on the spot. Now, you would think that would impress an ancient sorcerer mummy, but Mumra still believes that it would take more than this to defeat the heroic Thundercats. Slythe Scythe insists, however, that the robot has far more weapons in store and sends it straight toward Cat's lair. Meanwhile, over at Cat's lair, the ThunderCats are examining the time capsule they've recovered from the caveman in a previous episode. The device activates and projects a hologram of Thundera. Lion-O stares at it like an adult watching their childhood home videos. Later that night, while on watch duty, he decides to experiment with the capsule alone, but he was not the most tech-savvy Thunderian, right? He stands directly in front of the projector and somehow ends up transported back in time and space to Thundera, moments before its destruction. I would love a technical explanation, but the episode does not provide one, so we move on. Back in the present, Cat's lair detects a massive object on approach. The ThunderCats rush to the control room and realize two things at once. First, a giant warbot is on its way, and second, Lion-O is nowhere to be found. Panthro fires the lair's lasers, but the warbot reflects the beams back, shattering the fortress's eyes. Panthro switches tactics and uses the ballista to fire everything he has: fire, ice, missiles, and even a massive chain. The robot shrugs it all off. On Thundera, Lion-O reunites with his old saber-toothed pet, Kano, who leads him to his father, Claudus. There, he finds Slythe and Vulture Man pressuring Claudus for the warbot's plans. Lion-O intervenes, drives them off, and Claudus hands him the blueprints, telling him they may prove useful in another world, another time. Lion-O urges his father to leave with him, but Claudus refuses, cause he must stay and boost the guidance system on Jaga's ship. So, much like Jaga, Claudus sacrifices himself too. The earthquakes worsen and father and son part ways. Back on Third Earth, the warbot escalates. It fires enormous chains that latch onto Cat's lair's head and rip the entire top section away. Then it leaps onto the fortress and sprays a gray substance that turns the ThunderCats into statues. Yes, all of them. At that exact moment, Lion-O returns. Once again, how he returns to Third Earth and in their own time is anyone's guess. With the Sword of Omens, he frees his team and then forces the warbot away from the lair. He launches himself from the ballista and lands near the robot's feet. The warbot lifts a giant foot to crush him, but Lion-O notices a small red disc underneath. He drives the sword into it, the foot explodes, and the damage cascades through the machine. Naturally, the warbot collapses and detonates. And just like that, the mutant's grand intervention becomes scrap metal. Lion-O has to live with what he saw on Thundera, but he also brings back knowledge that saves his team. One trip through time, one destroyed robot, and Cat's lair survives another day. Safari Joe, Season 1, Episode 24. A spaceship lands in a forest clearing and out steps Safari Joe, who calls himself the best big game hunter in the galaxy. And although it might sound like a stretch, he is honest. He has already hunted big cats, aqua cats, and sky cats, so naturally he now wants ThunderCats. Because of course he does. But you know what? I want to find out what aqua cats look like. But I guess that's not happening, so let's just move on with the episode, yeah? So Safari Joe's only company is Mule, a robotic assistant who unloads supplies and sets up camp like a slave. Mule also activates a holojector that displays profiles of Joe's past prey, as well as future ones, which means that Mule does his research, and Safari Joe needs this research to learn whatever he can before moving in on the prey to hunt them down. Elsewhere, Wily Kit and Wily Cat cruise through the forest on hoverboards, and Wily Kit decides to show off. Big mistake. Safari Joe stalks them from the bushes and fires at their boards, shattering them mid-air. As they fall, giant bags snap shut around them. Back at Cat's lair, Lion-O and Snarf are playing Kick the Bucket, which is okay until you realize Panthro is pacing around, concerned about an electronic blind detected in the forest. Now, this blind hides Joe's ship and camp. No radiation is good enough to penetrate it, so Lion-O tries sight beyond sight, but even the Sword of Omens cannot see through it. Now that was concerning, so Tigra and Chitara decide to investigate on foot. At Safari Joe's camp, he locks the Thunder Kittens in Thundranium cages and reviews his next targets through the holojector. It first projects Tigra, then Chitara, complete with strengths and weaknesses. Oh, and we learn that Tigra can't swim. That's his weakness. But if you think about it, tigers are excellent swimmers, especially the Royal Bengal tiger. Oh, and did you know what the mighty Panthro fears? Well, he fears bats. That's the only fear he has. Anyway, not long after, Tigra and Chitara walk right into Joe's trap, who fires rocket-powered cuffs to capture Chitara and drops Tigra into a water-filled pit. They join the others in Thundranium cages. Joe then calls up Panthro's profile. Panthro takes the Thunder Tank to search for his team and finds the electronic blind. Before he can react, Joe unloads explosive rounds that flip the tank over. Panthro charges with his nunchucks, but Joe fires a shot that transforms into a massive energy bat, and it paralyzes him, and Joe cages him as well. Mule then attempts to analyze Lion-O. The holojector begins to display him wielding the Sword of Omens, but the system shorts out and explodes. Mule explains that the Eye of Thundera defies analysis, and Safari Joe actually looks pleased. Finally, a challenge. Back at Cat's lair, Jaga appears and warns Lion-O about the hunter, after which the Lord of Cats goes to confront Safari Joe and immediately faces every gadget Joe has. Nets, traps, weapons, but Lion-O counters them all. Finally, Lion-O suggests fighting hand-to-hand, but Joe does not honor it, and the Thundercat leader retreats into Cat's lair and dares Joe to follow. Inside, Lion-O keeps him chasing through corridors until he slips and lands at Joe's feet. Before Joe can fire, Snarf charges in and kicks the bucket straight into Joe's back. The hunter drops his weapon. Without it, his confidence disappears and he surrenders. In the end, the Thundercats escort Safari Joe back to his ship and make him promise to quit hunting. Panthro reprograms Mule to enforce that promise. And just like that, the galaxy's greatest hunter learns that Thundercats are not trophies. Lion-O's Anointment First Day, The Trial of Strength, Season 1, Episode 37. Lion-O wakes up on his birthday expecting cake, maybe a little celebration, and instead he finds the cat's lair totally empty, except for Snarf, who then reveals to Lion-O that that day was not about presents. It is Anointment Day, and according to the Code of Thundera, when a lord comes of age, he must pass the Anointment Trial to prove he is worthy to lead. And the trials were not easy either. Lion-O could not use the Sword of Omens nor the Claw Shield. So, while unarmed, at some point, he must face the Thundercats themselves. Snarf hands him a map and basically says, "Good luck." Lion-O starts strong. The first obstacle was a bed of stinging flowers. He pushes through. Then comes the acid lake. There was no way to cross it swimming, and going around would take a lot of time, and he would not be able to meet Panthro on time, his first challenger. This is when Lion-O sees giant vulture-like birds circling overhead, so he snares one and uses it as airborne transport across the lake, while acid splashes dangerously close to his legs. Next up is the Great Void, a ghost-like phantom that attacks him. Lion-O fights it off and keeps moving. After that, he reaches the Vortex, a rocky formation that sucks everything toward its center, kinda like a miniature black hole. He struggles against the wind, barely escapes being pulled in, and continues on his route. By the time he reaches the beach, he finds himself exhausted and collapses. And because this is a trial, rest is not allowed. Two crabmen burst from the sand and attack him, but he manages to get past them as well. Eventually he climbs toward a mountain near Wolo Village, and there he meets Panthro. Now, this is where things get complicated. Fighting monsters is one thing, fighting your friend is another. Lion-O hesitates, but the Code of Thundercats leaves no room for sentiment. The two heroes engage until an earthquake splits the ground, and Lion-O falls into a deep crevice. Panthro sees him hanging by the edge and reaches to help. However, the code forbids assistance because the code does not allow for that. Then the real test presents itself when a massive boulder, loosened by the quake, barrels down toward Wolo Village. Panthro stops it with his bare hands and nearly gets crushed in the process. A stray rock hits his shoulder and he starts to slip, but Lion-O ultimately rolls the boulder away from the village himself, and Panthro concedes defeat. Clearly, the Thundercats teach us that strength is not about ego. It is about protecting others even when you are exhausted. Panthro removes the Thundercats insignia from his belt and hands it to Lion-O, marking the completion of the first trial. The trial of strength is complete, and Lion-O is not done yet. Now, this was the first day of the trial. Let's check out the last one.
Incubi!
Lion-O's Anointment Day, The Trial of Evil, Season 1, Episode 61. So this one takes us to the last day of the Anointment Trials, and the mood inside the sword chamber is not exactly celebratory, mostly because Lion-O had to do the undoable. The other Thundercats stand around, fully aware that Lion-O has to face Mum-Ra without the Sword of Omens and without backup. And let's be honest, Mum-Ra is not your average villain of the week. Even they admit this is the toughest enemy any Thundercat Lord has had to face unarmed. I mean, it's not Lion-O's fault that his biggest enemy is Mum-Ra. Now, Mum-Ra pretends to find the whole thing amusing. An unarmed Lion-O? Please. And yet, for someone so confident, he immediately runs to the mutants and orders them to intercept Lion-O before he figures out how to enter the Black Pyramid. So, either Mumsy is cautious, or he knows this cub has grown up. The mutants agree, although they clearly do not understand why their boss fears an unarmed Thundercat. Meanwhile, Lion-O talks with Jaga near the ruins. Jaga advises rest before such a battle. Lion-O, however, decides that creatures of darkness are best faced at night. Bold move. You can almost see Jaga sigh in ghost form. The mutants ambush Lion-O and trap him inside an old tomb. Inside the treasure chamber, he meets Maftet, the Lynx god, guardian of the riches. Once Maftet realizes Lion-O does not care about treasure, he eases up. However, when he hears Lion-O seek the ancient devil priest Mum-Ra, he tries to discourage him. Lion-O refuses to turn back, and Maftet finally directs him toward the Black Pyramid. Deeper underground, Lion-O reaches a river and demands that a cloaked boatman take him across. The price? Lion-O foolishly says he will pay any price. Of course, the cost turns out to be his destruction. The boatman paralyzes him with a touch, yet Lion-O rocks the boat hard enough to capsize it. The boatman falls into the water and disintegrates. For a professional ferryman, that is a rough day, and he isn't even very professional now, is he? Next, from his cauldron, Mum-Ra watches and grows uneasy. He unleashes his devil forms one by one: a suffocating fog, a living ceiling that tries to crush Lion-O, a huge cocoon creature, then a fire similar to the Inflamer. Each attempt fails. Lion-O loses the boat during the river fight and gets pulled under. He finds chains along the wall, hauls himself out, and marches into the tomb chamber. Finally, the two face each other. Mum-Ra lands a few solid hits and even tosses Lion-O aside, but then Lion-O takes cover behind the sarcophagus. When Mum-Ra hurls a pillar, it strikes the sarcophagus instead and cracks it. That is when Lion-O understands the truth. The sarcophagus restores Mum-Ra's power, so he lifts it and throws it onto the cauldron. Mum-Ra turns to dust. Jaga appears, praises Lion-O despite his stubborn streak, and soon after, Lion-O receives official anointment before the ThunderCats outside the cat's lair. And if you thought that was the end, think again. As the episode closes, that familiar cackle echoes in the distance. Mum-Ra may fall, but he never stays gone for too long. ThunderCats Ho! Part 1 to 5, Season 2. Season 2 opens with Lion-O haunted by a memory. He dreams of Thundera's final moments and recalls seeing 3 Thunderians who did not reach their ships. Now, when he wakes, Jaga appears and tells him that the Thunderian survivors are alive on Third Earth. Now, as you can see for yourself, this is no small revelation. Cheetara confirms it through her senses too, although she can only narrow it down to an island somewhere in the ocean. Meanwhile, Mum-Ra also learns of this development and wastes no time in sending the Berserkers to capture the survivors first. The pirates succeed because, of course they do. Lion-O attempts a rescue from Hammerhand's vessel, but fails, and the episode ends with him in the ocean as Hammerhand's fire volleys turn the water into a boiling trap. Not how you want to wrap up your first episode of the season. Part 2 begins with Panthro pulling Lion-O from the sea in the new Thunderclaw. Everyone suspects Mum-Ra's involvement and they split up to respond. Snarf heads out to retrieve the others but gets captured by Ratar-O in the Rat Star. So now Lion-O has 2 rescue missions on his hands. That attempt goes poorly as well, and Lion-O ends up dumped over Hook Mountain, where Snowman later finds himself half frozen. Meanwhile, the Berserkers transfer the captured Thunderians to Captain Shiner, who delivers them to Fire Rock Mountain. Now this place is important. It is actually located amid Thundranium, which weakens ThunderCats. So even if they break free, the environment itself fights them. As if to underline that things will not be easy, Lion-O and Snowman then face the mutants' new vehicle, the Fist Pounder. In Part 3, Lion-O narrowly avoids becoming a flat stain under the Fist Pounder. However, the Pounder triggers an avalanche that buries him in snow. Once again, he freezes, and once again, the Sword of Omens saves him. He signals for help, but before Cheetara and Tigra arrive, he commandeers Slide's Skycutter. After a skirmish, Lion-O heads alone toward the Black Pyramid to confront Mum-Ra. Meanwhile, Panthro battles the Fist Pounder with Snowman, and the Rat Star joins the fight, blasting Panthro in the process. Slythe and Jackalman leave to meet Shiner at Fire Rock Mountain to guard the prisoners. The Thunderians attempt to escape yet again. Inside the mountain, the fumes are less severe, but outside they remain a barrier. Over at the pyramid, Lion-O deals with Ma Mutt and animated mummy wrappings. The episode closes with him trapped under a door, hairpinned and body tangled in living bandages. Not a great look for a lord. Part 4 begins with sunlight dissolving the wrappings. Lion-O abandons his direct pursuit of Mum-Ra and heads toward Fire Rock Mountain instead. The mutants set up an ambush on the only road there using the Fist Pounder. Mum-Ra orders the Rat Star to reinforce the area, but Ratar-O must fly over Tuscania, where the Tuskas damage his ship. Snarf escapes during this mess and meets Termagar. They overhear the Berserkers' plan to re-kidnap the Thunderians and sell them again to Mum-Ra for more gold. So, Snarf and Termagar head out to sea to interfere. At Fire Rock Mountain, the Thunderians attempt to escape once more and make real progress, but the Thundrillium fumes near the cave exit still threaten them. Meanwhile, Mum-Ra manipulates Hachiman to stop Lion-O. Because Hachiman knows Lion-O is not evil, Mum-Ra resorts to darker influence. They clash on the fume-filled bridge to Fire Rock Mountain, and Lion-O slips over the edge. You can almost hear the collective gasp. Part 5 picks up with Hachiman regaining his senses in time to save Lion-O from the fall. After learning the truth, he joins Lion-O's side. Mum-Ra attempts to regroup, but Cheetara and Tigra intercept Captain Shiner and send him and the Virtus on an unexpected warp-speed ride. Snarf and Termagar, joined by the Thunder Kittens, battle the Berserkers at sea. Panthro outmaneuvers Monkion's Fist Pounder ambush and sends it off a cliff, where it lands directly on the Berserkers' ship. The Rat Star, already damaged by the Tuskas, remains ineffective, which means Mum-Ra must deal with the problem himself. And now, Lion-O faces a final obstacle. Thundradium blocks his path to the captives. Jaga appears and explains that the Star of Thundera can grant immunity to its effects. Jaga retrieves it, although Mum-Ra sends Groon to stop him. After a brief fight, the star defeats Groon. Jaga places the star into a talisman and gives it to Lion-O. Protected, Lion-O crosses the bridge and shields the Thunderians through physical contact. Angered, Mum-Ra seizes the talisman and opens it despite Jaga's warning. The star's unleashed power destroys Fire Rock Mountain and seemingly Mum-Ra as well. In the end, everyone returns to Cat's Lair. The rescued Thunderians, namely Lynx-O, Pumaira, and Bengali, do not assume they have earned a place there. However, Lion-O anoints them as ThunderCats and grants them insignias. And that is how ThunderCats Ho! Shifts from a rallying cry to a statement of growth. The team is larger and the family expands. And Lion-O proves that leadership sometimes means finding those you thought were lost and bringing them home. Bracelet of Power, Season 3, Episode 15. The episode starts with the ThunderCats returning from New Thundera carrying a chest full of ornaments and jewelry. Now, most of us see it like museum inventory, but Snarf spots a shiny gold bracelet and asks to borrow it for a while. Harmless request, right? Wrong. The bracelet turns out to be the Bracelet of Power, one of the items that form the treasure of Thundera, and this little accessory does not boost strength or speed. It gives the wearer the ability to control others. So naturally, Snarf starts ordering the ThunderCats around. Chores, tasks, commands, the whole power trip goes to his head pretty quickly. Meanwhile, Mum-Ra watches everything unfold through his cauldron. He sees opportunity written all over it. He transforms into a housefly, sneaks into Cat's Lair, and steals the bracelet straight off Snarf's wrist. Back in his ever-living form, Mum-Ra wears the bracelet and commands the ThunderCats to fly him to the Black Pyramid in the Feliner. Once they arrive, he locks Lion-O, Panthro, Tigra, and Cheetara behind bars, which I must agree is super efficient villain work. Now, Snarf feels responsible, as he should, so he teams up with Wily Kit and Wily Cat and sneaks into the pyramid. Pretending to remain under the bracelet's control, Snarf gets close enough to remove it from Mum-Ra's wrist. At the same time, the Thunder Kittens pass the Sword of Omens to Lion-O. From there, the tide turns. The ThunderCats defeat Mum-Ra and head back home with one important lesson. Maybe don't borrow ancient treasure without reading the fine print. The Last Day, Season 3, Episode 20. Now, this one had an unusual sight at the very beginning, cause we see Mum-Ra in trouble. I mean, trouble usually finds the ugly mummy at the end of episodes, right? So the ancient spirits of evil have had enough. They are furious over his repeated failures and the loss of the mutants and the lunatics. So they hand him an ultimatum. One day, he gets one full day to rid Third Earth of the ThunderCats. To make sure he understands the stakes, they banish Ma Mut right in front of him. Then they transform Mum-Ra into his most powerful form yet, and in the process, his own pyramid does not survive the upgrade. That is how serious this is. Now, the cataclysmic things begin to happen across Third Earth. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions. The ThunderCats analyze the disturbances and conclude that the planet could face total destruction in less than 12 hours. They suspect Mum-Ra immediately and head out in their vehicles to find him. Tigra and Cheetara encounter him first, and this version of Mum-Ra is gigantic. The good old Tigra does not fail to point out that he looks uglier, which was a bit unnecessary, but fair, so I'm okay with that. Mum-Ra teleports them to another dimension. Lion-O and Panthro arrive and put up a fight. Yet Panthro joins the others in exile soon after. Then Mum-Ra traps Lion-O inside a prison of stone and molten lava. Meanwhile, he banishes the Thunder Kittens and destroys the Tower of Omens with a single strike from the Sword of Blundar. Back at the lair, Lynx-O advises Snarf to use the treasure of Thundera. Snarf arms himself with every item and enters the Book of Omens, hoping the Guardian reveals how to defeat Mum-Ra. At the same time, Jaga intervenes. He gathers the ThunderCats trapped in limbo and channels their essence into the Eye of Thundera. The Eye gains enough strength to free Lion-O from his rocky tomb and send him straight toward Mum-Ra. Before the final clash resumes, Snarf appears within the Eye and tells Lion-O the key is survival. He must endure until sundown. Now, that sounds simple, but against this version of Mum-Ra, it is not. Mum-Ra dominates much of the fight, yet Lion-O holds on. When the sun sets, the ancient spirits enforce their decree. They imprison Mum-Ra in glass, just as they punished Ma Mut earlier. As he howls and questions whether this is the end, we are left wondering the same. The Book of Omens, Season 4, Episode 20. Alright, here we are. The final entry in our list, which happened to be the final episode of the original 1980s run. The Curtain Call, The Last Roar, whatever you will. And I will admit, there is something poetic about ending with an episode titled The Book of Omens. If you're going to close the series, you might as well lean into prophecy and ancient guardians. It opens with New Thundera under serious stress. Earthquakes tear through the planet, and Panthro very calmly reveals to the other ThunderCats that the entire world is coming apart. I say calmly because his delivery sounds almost casual, which is pretty crazy considering planetary destruction is on the cards. He suspects the Book of Omens holds the answer. Lion-O uses the key to Thundera, which we first saw in the episode Key to Thundera, and receives a message from the Guardian of the Book. According to the instructions received, Lion-O must take several treasures and place them at specific locations around New Thundera. After that, he must present the key to the Guardian, and he must do all this within 24 hours. If he fails, New Thundera will be destroyed and the ThunderCats will be frozen in time. No one really knows what a frozen world would look like, but it does not sound pleasant. So, the finale becomes a reverse scavenger hunt. The ThunderCats split up, each carrying artifacts to dangerous spots across the planet. It is risky, of course. Obstacles arise, environments resist them, and yet one by one, they succeed. Meanwhile, the clock ticks. Eventually, Lion-O prepares to enter the book and present the key. However, Mum-Ra interferes. He steals both the book and the key and enters the book himself. So now, Lion-O has no choice but to follow him inside. Once within the book, the two confront each other. They learn that weapons cannot decide this fight. So, Lion-O drops the Sword of Omens and the battle becomes unarmed combat. I know, Lion-O willingly letting go of the sword almost feels historic. Naturally, Lion-O prevails. He reclaims the key and presents it to the Guardian just in time, and the earthquakes stop. Furthermore, several unpleasant regions of New Thundera transform into far more pleasant landscapes, and the planet stabilizes, so that there could be order once again. The episode gives us time with Lion-O and Mum-Ra, but it also includes Panthro, Cheetara, Lynx-O, Bengali, Wily Kit, Wily Cat, Snarf, the ancient spirits of evil, and even Pyron in his gold armor. As for insults, Mum-Ra calls Lion-O a disciple of good, which for him is clearly an insult. The ancient spirits also lash out at Mum-Ra, likely calling him a fool. In the end, the ThunderCats remind everyone of their duty to protect the environment. Then they close with a confident cry of "ThunderCats, ho!" So yeah folks, these were the 10 most rewatchable episodes from the 80s run of ThunderCats animated series. Technically 14 episodes if you count those 5 from the 5-parter ThunderCats, ho! While working on the script though, I realized I remembered watching nearly all of the episodes. How many did you remember? Well, let me know in the comments, and if you liked the video, please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these lore lockdowns. Stay safe and have a good one!